Okay, so I'm watching Sir Ken Robinson, like a little creative piece done on YouTube. Sir Ken Robinson, How Are You Intelligent? I've seen him speak a few times on education and creativity, and uh, think he's a brilliant advocate for, uh, you know, this idea around looking at and thinking about creativity and intelligence in very new and more integrated ways. The first time I saw him was, oh my God, I don't, maybe 2012, maybe 2012 or 2013. And that was already years, I think, after he'd done his TED Talk. He's got this really great TED Talk on actually the education system and its effect on creativity. Anyways, in this particular talk, he asks a question in and around comparing intelligence to creativity. And, do you think of yourself as intelligent? Do you think of yourself as creative? And how do you rate those two traits? And as I'm sitting here thinking about it, it seems strange to separate intelligence from creativity, but because I feel like you need you need the one to exhibit the other, right? So it's very hard to separate them. But if I had to separate them, um, I, if I'm forced to separate intelligence from creativity, I guess I think of intelligence as sort of classic academic learning, and creativity as sort of a more kind of spontaneous um, process of creation and problem solving. So maybe intelligence is the process of learning, and creativity is maybe the process of solving. Um, I don't like even using the term solving problems because I don't necessarily think creativity is about solving problems. I mean, you can apply it that way, but I feel like creativity is sort of the best way that I can think of creativity is to think of it as is a synthesis. It's a process of synthesis, which isn't necessarily a process of learning, though learning is a process of synthesis too. But like learning is more linear. You read something and you retain it, you remember it. You um, understand it, and you retain it is learning, I guess. Whereas creativity is you take all of the things that you've learned and you sort of rearrange them in a way that's meaningful in some way. Uh, so from that perspective, uh, uh, m- more of a synthesis, right? And this synthesis produces something, right? Learning doesn't necessarily produce something, but it learning is tested and I guess can be evaluated. Um, but I think creativity actually produces something. Now, do I think of myself as more intelligent or more creative? That's a tough one, but I think I can tell you what I'm more motivated by, and I think I'm more motivated by creativity than I am motivated by raw intelligence. So I'm not as motivated to learn for the sake of learning. I'm not um I think I lack uh an appreciation for reward in that way. So I feel like academic learners really love the reward system. Like they're really about getting those A's and getting that pat on the back. Like they really are driven by reward. And I'm not that. I mean, I like to win, but I don't think I'm as for some reason not I'm not as responsive that way. I think I'm more responsive to uh internal questions and curiosity. Sort of that motivates me more. So I think that for some reason I feel like that is more creativity caters to that impulse more than intelligence does. So I feel like there's more of a relationship between curiosity and creativity as sort of uh, the yin and the yang of it. So curiosity drives creativity. Um, where on the learning side, I feel like the motivation there is more about reward systems, and just sort of being somebody who genuinely is motivated by like explicit knowledge and maybe performance. Like knowledge, I think tends to be performance oriented, i.e., reward oriented. And curiosity or creativity um, can be self gratifying. I mean, there can be a performance component too. You can create something and then show it to the world, and then gain some form of reward from that. So there is that, but I think that largely it's still very internal. Creativity, I think, tends to be more of an internal journey or a process of making sense of things based on your own belief systems, and it's just more internal. And knowledge for knowledge's sake, I think, again, can also be internal. But in my experience, academically, I feel like people who perform really well academically uh, genuinely enjoy that performance. They genuinely enjoy showing up and getting the grade, and are driven by that system of reward, right? So, so I think it's an interesting thing, because I, like, again, I feel like it's hard to pull these things apart from each other because I think they are very integrated. But maybe our system, our educational system, not even just our educational system. I think our entire like our sort of societal paradigm does pull them apart. Society has managed to make creativity um, a kind of, there's something wrong with like there's something wrong with how we treat creativity, how we think about creativity. Um, we've punished it on some level and made it it's bad. Like honestly, and I'm a pure heart creative. Like I'm a pure heart creative. And I came up through a system that more or less stamped the hell out of that. Like it's just like it all but, you know, murdered that impulse um in the system. And I think that that comes from a lack of understanding creativity, and certainly lack of appreciating what it is and how it uh, shapes you as a person, and also shapes how you see the world. Most people, I think creativity is just sort of this foo foo she she process of self-aggrandizing projects, right? Uh, I don't think so. I think uh, a way that you approach the world. It's how you like creatives. I think have a particular way of solving problems, and I even hate the synthesis is a particular style of thinking. I think it's a style of thinking, and uh, uh, but we have been indoctrinated to think of creativity. Well, first of all, to think of talent and interests very linearly. So we think, oh, well, that's a dancer, dancers dance. That's a writer, writers write. um that's a mathematician, mathematicians do math. I've never known a human being in my life who was only talented in one thing, ever. I've never known anybody, I've never met anybody in my entire life who's only good at one thing and one thing only. So I've never really understood that, the way that we kind of cut creativity off at the head, right? And I think we render it useless because we've come out of this school system, and this age of analog and linearity that has a very narrow view of human potential, a very narrow and linear view of human potential. And I think it's done a huge disservice to us. And I think that as we move into the digital age, I think that that's going to be turned on its head, because creativity is going to become the prime um, activity, you know. And I think moving into the virtual world, and people developing platforms and developing multiple streams of revenue, and where is it easier to do that than in the digital space, right? There's nowhere easier to do that than in the digital space, where we're going to have people who come online from all different parts of the world and these sorts of things. um, your ability to tell stories, your ability to sort of present your point of view, your ability to build your platform, your ability to you know, harness your voice, right, is going to be, I think, very relevant in the next generation or two. So I think that calls for creativity to become center stage, and not just creativity. Again, this isn't about linearity. This is about truly understanding the creative mind, right? So I think education has taught us to be performance oriented, to be reward oriented, and to use our talents linearly. So, you know, you might be good at math. If you're very, very good at math, then that becomes your stream. And everything that you do becomes streamlined to that particular capacity. Likewise, if you're a dancer, you're a physical person, in our education system, that becomes something that becomes a very linear practice, right? And all things physical um, become things that you're encouraged to participate in without taking a step back and trying to understand the totality of the picture. So what is your synthesis? Like what is your synthetic what does your synthesis process look like? How do you take in the world, and and also what really motivates you? Like, if some people are really driven by reward systems, and I think that's fine, and I don't think that that goes away in this new paradigm, but I think that uh what's what will be interesting to see in the digital space, which onto itself is very sort of complicated and exponentially complicated by nature. Uh, it'll be interesting to see how creativity is leveraged in this space. I think it's a very nice complement, the digital space and the creative mind. The digital space, which is, you can have a website and social media platforms and a video series and and all of these different potential outlets for you for your storytelling, whatever that happens to be, or for your business, whatever that happens to be, and a way for you to sort of you know, uh, utilize all of your talents in various ways. So maybe you create a series, maybe you involve storytelling, writing, maybe you involve making music, right? And all of these areas of interest get tapped in some way, or have the potential to be tapped in a digital environment that didn't exist 10 and 20 years ago, right? That was just, it was not feasible, right? Because our world didn't allow for that kind of flexibility or that kind of expression. Um, 10, 20 years ago, it really did make sense to be very, sort of hone in on your primary skill set and find ways to leverage that in the working world. But I think that now we have an opportunity to become very flexible and very fluid. But that also is going to mean really understanding uh, and appreciating uh, creatives and the creative mindset, which to me is a synthesis mindset. It is this thing, you incorporate this thing that happened to you 10 years ago and yesterday in this thing that you read this morning, and this project you've been working on and off for the last 3 years, and suddenly everything crystallizes and it makes sense and you can write that great novel. Right? I don't, nobody understands it, nobody quite gets it because it's not linear. And the fact that you were good at uh, magic tricks, and the fact that you speak three languages, and the fact that for whatever reason you have this obsession with um, you know occult history. Who knows? All of this comes together, when it needs to, as it needs to, and in a way that makes sense to the individual, right? Which is something that we just could not access in a productive, comprehensive way before the advent of the internet, right? So I think these things run very parallel, and I think the internet is a really interesting instrument because I think it has this capacity to really allow us to tap our potential in more and more and more um, dramatic and relevant ways. We're not there yet. We're not there yet. I think we're still wrestling with a lot of things. Obviously, both in terms of sort of just efficiencies and comprehension and even morality. Really, how are these things going to all come together over the next 5, 10 years that don't destroy individuals? Can you trust the government? Can you trust the internet? Can you trust businesses? Do you understand your environment? These are all relevant questions that we have, not the least of which is, do we understand and can we appreciate creativity and the way creative minds work? And I think largely for myself, anyways, coming up, I don't think there was any appreciation for being a creative. That was largely a she foo foo um, pursuit that had no real relevance to the real world. And I feel kind of gypped a little bit as a creative because um, I feel like that's exactly the opposite. I think we suddenly find ourselves inside of a world where being a creative is absolutely what you want to be now. You know, it doesn't mean that I'm not negating science, engineering, math, technology. I think that there's a necessity to understand the pipes and the wires and the machinery in a very, very intimate and fluent way, but also in a way that frees your creativity even more. So these things really do complement each other, right? So I think that to be a creative today is like a blessing, but it's very challenging, very, 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 very challenging for a lot of different reasons, not just in terms of our lack of understanding where creatives are concerned, and our tendency to think of creativity as just sort of this egotistical pursuit, oftentimes sort of associated with making money and, being this pop culture uh, character. I think that's how it's been characterized for me in my life, how it's been characterized, and I think how we've all been sort of taught to think of creativity in terms of just sort of being this self-serving waste of time. And I think that just again speaks to a fundamental lack of understanding, because as I say, people who I know who are A, intelligent, and B, creative, tend to be that way in many areas, in many respects, on complex levels, and have passions that range and they're wildly diverse. And that's what makes sense to me. It might not make sense to like older generations, but I think in my life that's what I've seen a lot of, and that's actually what makes sense to me. Like, actors who write and who do photography, musicians who are programmers and scientists. like, these things that to me is what normal human expression looks like. It's varied, it's vast, um, and it's intelligent and creative. Uh, so and and I think we've got to make room for that reality, and that level of complexity, that level of understanding, in order to really make this next iteration of contemporary life work for us. Again, coming back to ideas around equilibrium, appreciation for nuance, appreciation for effective thinking, effective learning, and certainly effective expression, right? Um, Understanding intelligence, understanding creativity, understanding how they're distinct and how they work together. So, I do think that that's important, and I do think that that's absolutely uh, what the kinds of conversations we need to be having over the next maybe the next long while, you know. But yeah, creativity and intelligence. It's hard to pull them apart, but I think it's important to see that that's precisely what we've been doing for the last few generations. So this next cohort of learners and teachers and all of these things, how are they looking at it? And how are they integrating them and using them more? Using the language and the discussions and the debate more effectively, so that we can, live healthier, more balanced lives. Very, very interesting. Anyways,